this? Lovely. How many of you have never heard of me before? That's exactly right. I always say I'm like one of the best known unknown speakers in the United States. And it keeps you humble too. I only wrote one book, and I was going to write a book on the 7 mountains, and actually have a lot of notes. But then, to the best of my ability to hear the Lord, I could sense the Lord was saying, forget that book. You missed the window on that one. So I think I might still be able to do it, but I'll have to do it later. The Lord said, I want a book on Donald Trump. And I really wrestled with that, because I have friends of mine, well-meaning friends, that would say, you know, you've got a great reputation, you got a good ministry, why would you blow it all on getting involved with politics? I said, well, that's a good question. Why would I do that? And so I went to the Lord and I said that this could really mess my whole brand and message up if I get involved in politics. And the Lord's answer was very humbling. He said, there aren't that many people that know that much about you to mess up your brand. Which is what I told you today. But it sounded like a sophisticated argument. My brand is politics. So I said, nobody knows who you are. Don't worry about your brand. There's no brand out there. So I wrote the book, God's Gas Candidate, with Mercedes' help, and so my VP operations manager. And so Mercedes, so we got the book out, but it was like 30 days before the election. Now it's a bestseller book. It's not easy to have 70 or 80,000 books. This book would have been 1 million easily had it not come out just a few weeks before the election. And but I wrote it, and in the book I predicted 3 things that I think are rather seminal. Let me talk about what a futurist is. I predicted Trump's presidency, which was not supposed to happen statistically, but I predicted the term, catch this, that Trump would be likened to Cyrus in history. And that's exactly what Netanyahu came to the White House and said after the embassy move. He said, no, you know, Mr. President, the Jewish people have a long memory, and we remember Cyrus of old, and we remember what you've done, which was helpful for me, because I was getting slammed by the New York Times, and the Salon magazine, and Fox, and the Daily Beast, and every, you know, liberal, digital, you know, journalism force in the world. They were attacking me because I likened Trump to a biblical character. That was their problem. They said, how can anyone in the right mind equate Donald Trump to a biblical character? So when the Cyrus thing came out, it was fine. But here's the other interesting thing. I predicted the term Trump derangement syndrome in my book 2 months before the election. I said, the media will lose their mind. They will be deranged. And we will call it Trump derangement syndrome. So when I heard like Rush Limbaugh, different people quoting that terminology, I said, my gosh, they didn't read it in the book. I just picked up on the term before it came out. But this is important because this is like a momentary message here on 7 mountains and convergence. And part of convergence is this. Doing what God calls you to do doesn't necessarily mean that when you're doing it, it all looks like it's working out. And that's an important proposition for business or ministry or life. So when I put the book out, it was, I put it out during the Feast of Trumpets. I remember because I was in Israel. I was speaking in Israel. I was speaking to dignitaries of Israel, as a matter of fact. And I was speaking to them, and I have some Jewish background on my father's side. I got family in Israel, and so I kind of feel a little bit at home when I'm in Israel. And I was there at the Mount Zion Hotel, and I'm talking to these ambassadors and such, and a knock comes at the door, and the guy says, hey, did your book go out? I said, yes, it went out on the presses during the Feast of Trumpets as I flew into Jerusalem, as I flew into Tel Aviv. He said, well, can you recall it? I go, why would I recall it? He goes, well, didn't you hear? And this is the moment that I found out about the Access Hollywood video. It comes out the day after my book gets released. So I said, well, how bad can it be? I took a 10-minute break from my diplomats. I said, we're going to take a 10-minute break. I have to look in. I go to my room, and I'm reading the transcript. I don't know if you've ever read the transcript of actual Donald Trump. It's even worse if you actually know what he said. So I'm reading this thing. I go there. I'm reading this, and immediately I realize, oh, my God. what a stupid thing to put a book out on Donald Trump. There's no way a person could possibly survive this. This is done. So I got on my knees, and this is, if you ever had these problems, I'm going to confess to you, this is what it's like. There are times when you pray and the heavens are brass, but you know that God's hearing, you sense his resistance. It would be called spiritual warfare. It's like, you know you're praying, but you're not getting the answer. But if this ever happens to you, this is a uniquely Jewish proposition. You're praying and God's ignoring you completely. That's a different feeling. It's not the heavens are brass. It's that you literally feel like God isn't even having a conversation. He's not even encouraging you. Keep trying, press in. It's kind of like, what are you talking about? So I'm praying. Here's my prayer. And I said, oh God, did I not say, let me not be deceived? I prayed over and over again, let me not be deceived. I said, I don't want to be deceived. I don't want to write a book. I don't want to get involved in politics. Did you not? I thought you told me to write the book. Why would you not tell me not to write the book? Absolutely nothing. Completely no response whatsoever. It's almost like, are you done? I got up, I was kneeling, I thought it was very religious in Mount Zion, a hotel, a Jew, or whatever. Get up. Here's what it says. You better say something. Because I have like an iPhone and I do media. And I said, well, what am I going to say? And I said, well, open your mouth wide and I will fill it. I thought, oh boy. Well, at least I got like maybe a couple thousand people. I should be doing some damage control over the book and kind of like maybe, prepare them for the fact that, so I hit got my iPhone hanging outside the window and I start talking. And as I'm talking, this is the other thing. When God does fill your mouth, you have to realize that you have a split second between hearing what you think you're supposed to say and actually having faith to say it. And it's kind of a fascinating proposition. This could happen in sales, it could happen in marketing, it could happen in counseling, it could happen in coaching, it could happen in any number of situations. In my case, it happened to be in survival. So I was trying to survive. So I said, no doubt many of you have heard about the Access Hollywood video. And you're saying to yourself, what does this mean? That's what I'm asking myself right now. And did God not know that this was going to happen? Of course God knew this was going to happen. It's just like the devil to bring it out right now at this moment in time to totally embarrass the man over 10 years ago. The devil always searching to find something. Of course the Lord knew and he's letting it happen. And now you're saying, why would the Lord let that happen? I'm thinking, that's what I want to know. And the answer comes up, and this is really climbing out on a limb. I said, and the answer is very simple. The Lord knew this was going to happen, and the Lord is allowing this to happen. And the devil can go ahead and do what the devil's going to try to do. And do you remember Donald Trump when he was first asked, have you ever repented of sin? See, if you ever follow his career, when he was being interviewed in Iowa by the evangelicals, they said, have you ever sinned? And he said, not that I can think of. Not exactly the answer the evancilicals are looking for. But you got Ben Carson and Mike Huckabee, and everybody else knows the appropriate answer. Even if they don't believe it, they all know what to say. Donald Trump's the only person that says, I can't think of anything actually I've ever done. I take my little wafer, I take my little grape juice, So I said, you remember his answer. He couldn't think of a sin he had actually done to repent of ever in his life. I said, well, the good news is now he has one. See? This is progress. Now, when he's president, should this thing happen, as we anticipate God's intervention is going to make this happen, remember this. He will never be able to take credit for his own strategy and ingenuity, because he's a very proud man, and it's part of the hubris that makes him kind of entertaining at times. But remember this, he will know that if he gets elected, it's an act of God, because something like this, whenever God does something like this, whenever God allows something like this, it is never to humiliate you, it's never to destroy you, it's only to humble you. And why would God humble you? If you're about to be promoted. So I stand by my prediction, he's going to be president, that this is humbling. Now he has a sin to repent of, and he's never going to take credit for getting elected, and God's going to get all the glory. Okay, so I hit send, and I'm thinking, this would be like damage control on 2,000 people who buy the book, maybe more. But you see, here's the problem. If you ever happen to randomly hit a trending topic on the internet, at the moment when other people are looking for that subject, it's called viral. And I hit send. Boop. I go back into my diplomats. Sorry, I'm gone. I'm back. And the guy comes back and knocks on the door and told me, can you recall the book? And now he says to me, are you watching what's happening with your post? I go, no. Oh. I was thinking, is it negative responses? He goes, oh, it's over 1 million people right now. I said, what? He said, it's over 1 million people. Look at this, the digits spinning like it's Las Vegas. I said, oh my God. Now I'm having a panic attack because I really didn't want to have the message going out. I just wanted to try to hedge my bets so that a few people have bought a book. This thing keeps going and going and going. It goes to 3.8 million people. So I'm doing, I'm calculating this because it's 3.8 million people, and I'm talking to George Barna at the election. He said, you realize that this election was a miracle because there was 20 million Christians that voted that had no organizational cohesion whatsoever. They were a group called SageCons, spiritually active, governmentally engaged conservatives. 20 million. They aren't even part of one organization. They're not the National Rifle Association, not the Right to Life. They're not even in the category called evangelical. They just happen to be spiritually active, governmentally engaged conservatives. 20 million of them went out. In the swing states, they went out and they voted with 85% unanimity. Never before has happened that many people that were not even in the polls all went out and voted the same way. And so, but in these states, it was 10,000 here, it was 5,000 there, it was 20,000 there, and so cumulatively, it was only 140,000 people. 140,000 Christians that determined the outcome of the future of America in 5 swing states. And my sense is people said to me, they said, you know what? It was 3.5 million people that were watching you fumble around to try to cover you explain your book that you wrote, that actually helped convince them that this was the direction to go in. And even if they weren't certain before they started, they felt you gave them a reason why they could still go ahead and vote. And you'll never know in history how much you can affect. By a remnant can change history. And you may be one of those people that actually is operating off of just the sense of intuition regarding things to come. But when you act on it, you have to believe that God will give you the next intuition. And then you have to believe that even if it's a contradiction, you aren't wrong. You have to persevere to find out what the end of the matter is. Does that make sense? Yes. So having said that, let's talk about the real issue, the real thing that the Lord is after today, and we're kind of missing it. Because my whole life as an evangelical, I was trained by D. James Kennedy. Anyone here have D. James? Dr. James Kennedy trained me in an evangelism explosion. So I started off as an evangelist, and I was in business, New York Stock Exchange. Our company was an oil company in New York. But I went into full-time ministry, so I thought that's where the action is. So I was like the rich young ruler. I left the business world to go plant churches and be a revivalist and an evangelist so that we could have revival and we could have souls. And of course, the key to having souls is having the church. So I went and was planting churches, and I was working as an evangelist, and I came out of the business arena. And out of all places, oh my God, I was so convicted. When I felt the call of God for souls and revival, I was working in Babylon, New York. Imagine what a head trip that was every day. Here I am making my money in Babylon. And I'm thinking, the only thing I know about Babylon is the Bible says, come out of her, my people. And here I am, making a fortune in Babylon. So I went from business in Babylon into the church market over here, focusing on souls. And what's interesting in the introduction Steve gave is that I found out that talking to Lauren Cunningham and Bill Bright and reading Francis Schaeffer and studying Abram Kuyper, I began to realize something. I began to realize, let's see, how many mountains do I have here? 7. If I have 8, then I added a Mormon mountain. I'm always confusing myself.
You got the right amount.
See, I never know. The Mormons are adding things all the time. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so what I began to realize is it's not just souls, but Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel and make disciples of all nations. See, here's our mistake. We don't look at nations, we look at souls. The problem with souls is it's always an ambiguous number. Have you ever looked at the data? It's a fascinating thing. I don't mean to be speaking derogatory about anybody, but I'm looking at the data from Joyce Myers, Reinhard Bonnke, and Joel Osteen, and the Billy Graham Association. And based on the data of those organizations, if you add in Benny Hinn, the entire world has been saved at least twice. This is good news. This makes me feel much better when I go to bed at night. Hey, what am I so worried about? I don't know where those people are, but evidently they're all saved. But you see, you can't measure souls. But what can you measure? You can measure nations. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Donald Trump decides that he's going to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. One day he's bored, he's sitting up, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, he just had a hamburger, he's upset with the Mueller investigation, he decides to do something disruptive, he's fighting with Kim Jong-un, you got a button, I got a bigger button, and mine works, boom, and then a week later, I'm going to move an embassy, boom, he's on the edge of his bed with his Twitter, times that change the world. So he makes the announcement, I think we're going to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Everybody's freaking out. But here's the interesting thing, if you look at the data on this, it's like he moves the embassy, there's only 9 people, 9 nations, including the United States and Israel, that actually voted in agreement with Jerusalem's right to exist as a government, as a self-governing nation. Think about this. As long as they've been around, the world doesn't want Jerusalem to actually have its headquarters, its capital in Jerusalem, and consolidate its right to exist with Jerusalem being the capital of Israel. And then you got the United States, and you have Israel, and who are the other countries standing with us? Micronesia and Togo. Well, that gives you confidence if a world war breaks out. Because we know that Togo and Micronesia standing with us. And so that's it. But we got 138. We have 138 nations that voted against us, and then we have like 40 nations that said, "I don't know what to do, what to say. I don't have an opinion." And you got 9 people that are forced. This doesn't tell you exactly that the whole world is siding with Jews and Christians. This is measurable. Unlike transformation or soul winning, this is a statistic you can look at. What does it tell you? The reason why I drew this view here is because America has said $22 trillion GDP. China has an $11 trillion GDP. France, Germany, England, Japan, $4 to $5 trillion. But check this out. Move this down. This is kind of interesting. Way down at the bottom, you've got 170 nations that are under a trillion to 500 billion, GDP. That means the majority of the nations that are down here aren't even players in the global economy. Why is that of interest? Well, because what that means is if the United States can just deal with its debt and not self-destruct and pull the president out of office while he's in there, we're twice the strength of China. China is totally the opposite of the United States. This is a communist system. This is guarding free enterprise and the future of democracy. But this 170, see, if we have a worldview that Jesus is coming for nations, and nations will be born in a day, and our mission is to go make disciples of nations, I promise you we will have the greatest harvest of souls we've ever had by focusing on nations and letting the United States fulfill its destiny by helping lift these nations up. And I'll tell you what, those nations can be lifted and will be lifted, and they have no problem with the gospel being preached in there. It brings with it the promise of stability and economic flourishing. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. We have to think differently. We're not thinking, you know what, most people are thinking nervous about the Antichrist and the collapse of Western civilization. You should already see God did a miracle with Donald Trump by putting him in there. Well, you know the best-selling book, this is frustrating, before I wrote my book, the #1 best-selling book was The Harbinger. We had 1 million Christians prepared for the judgment of America for the 100,000 that believed Donald Trump could make a difference. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nations are the game. And there's countries that are actually we could impact economically. I won't go into this now because of the limitation of time, but I'll tell you this. Right now we're looking at economic trade platforms between the United States and Israel, curiously enough, and these nations. And what we're looking at is the ability to create trade alliances and all that would have to do is affirm the right for Christians and Jews to be able to exist without being molested or persecuted. That would be the litmus test. And why is that important? Because I can't tell you whether the world's going to be separated into souls, but I can tell you something. There's going to be sheep nations and goat nations when Jesus comes back. This is some theology we should really be focusing on. Sheep nations and goat nations. What's a goat nation? A goat nation is a nation that, as much as you've done to the least of these, you've done to me. It's how they're going to treat the believers and the Jews. And what are the sheep nations? They will not persecute the Christians and the Jews. Evidently, there's sheep nations and goat nations. I know we all have faith for everything going to goats and Antichrist, but I think we have to give ourselves credit for the fact that at least we could salvage New Jersey or something. Mm-hmm. Sheep nations. Let's talk about that. Because now we got the church, but how does the church affect the nation? Obviously, we got church, the world's biggest churches in the United States, but not necessarily affecting the nation. You know why? Because between the church, you got the family over here. And we'll draw this line right here where we reach out to families. Well, what families are we reaching out to? Primarily families that are involved with church. Where are we losing the future? Academia. Why? Education's a big problem. Why? It's like a stronghold. Why is it a stronghold? Because 45% of the professors that are on college campuses right now are bitter, twisted individuals whose primary theology is Marxist. I say theology because they approach it with a religious zeal of someone proselytizing kids. 45% of the professors are Marxists. And that's why you have social justice warriors coming off of college campuses, because they're being trained by professors who are Marxists. This is the latest data, 45%. So you have your family, church. These are the 7 mind molders or gates of influence that shape nations. I can go into any nation and I can tell you, just by doing a survey of those 7 mountains, I can tell you exactly where the strength of the nation is or where its weakness is. Economically, religion. This is actually religion. It just happens to be the church is what I'm interested in. But if I'm in Iran, obviously it's Islam. And it's going to be the government, whoever's in control of that government. And then it's going to be media. Who would have thought that media is going to have the power it's got now? But I'll tell you the truth, and this is going to be pushing the boundaries of credibility for a lot of you, but I really do believe there is a spirit of Antichrist. The Bible talks about it. When it shows up, it's going to be a very powerful governmental expression, because in the government is where your laws are going to come from, and that's where your military comes from. But there's another factor to this. It's always the Antichrist and the false prophet. What do you think the false prophet is? The false prophet is media. I would encourage you to think about this. False prophet isn't an individual who's going to walk around, blah, 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 with, iPhone like I do. It's going to be an institutional power that's global in reach. It's already there right now. It's called media. Media, fake news, is a false prophet. Then you have the arts and entertainment. What's the difference? Why do I separate in my schematic media and entertainment? Because media is supposed to be talking about what is actual or real. If it's fake, it's dangerous. It's called propaganda. But nevertheless, you look to media to tell you what's happening. You look to entertainment to suspend reality. So arts is the arena for the suspension of reality. Media is where you're supposed to find what's going on. And then, of course, you've got business over here. I could take any of these nations here and tell you where they're at based upon, and what can happen is God could bless them financially, and God could raise up a people that are going to be, it's like bookends. If we can get prosperity with a strong, dynamic church that penetrates society, you'll have a sheep nation. But what happens when we no longer are intersecting with education? When the university systems are under the control of a hostile culture? And, well, here's the other thing that's kind of interesting. See, the stream goes this way. This is downstream, this way. You know, all politics, Andrew Breitbart said, it's so true, is downstream from culture. Arts, entertainment, music, and media, Saturday Night Live, John Oliver, it's the humorists, it's the rappers, it's the singers, it's the rock stars. They literally create the expectation for your politics. So politics is downstream from pop culture. Is Christianity engaged in pop culture? No, we created a glorious subculture. When it comes to media, we have TV and we have Daystar. We actually don't have writers that are in Saturday Night Live. We don't own the New York Times. We're not major journalists. This is the mistake we make. We create a Christian subculture where we can comfortably exist, but we're not influencing the main culture. And so the main culture is increasingly hostile, while our subculture is increasingly nervous. I can't even talk about Donald Trump on Christian television. Do you know how goofy that is? Every one of his brothers discussing something transgender this, or it's going to be a race issue over here, or it's going to be Donald Trump, or it's going to be Ocasio-Cortez and her green thing, the socialism. I'm on Christian television. Lance, what do you want to talk about? Favor, blessing, curses, this is ridiculous. I'm having a conversation no one else is having. Finally, I said, what we should talk about? Let's forget politics. Let's talk about government. Because the Bible says the government will be upon his shoulders. So let's discuss government, and let's make the Bible relevant to all these mountains. Does the Bible have something to say about gender? Does the Bible have something to say about creation? Does the Bible have something to say about economics? What does the Bible say about debt? What does the Bible say about enterprise versus loss of freedom? The Bible says a lot. Does that make sense? So here we have the 7 mountains. And what's fascinating is the Jewish people have never been more than 2.5% of the population in America. And look how much influence Jews have had. From Einstein to Bernstein to Seinfeld, Jews dominating everything. Alan Dershowitz. I can find the Jew everywhere. And they're a minority of the culture. What does it tell you? It tells you that I used to say this: we got to get more churches planted and more souls saved. More churches planted, more souls saved. I'm telling you, I'm a card-carrying person in this fanatical view. I literally left Babylon, New York, in order to go full-time with evangelism and church planting. Then one day it occurred to me, the LGBTQ movement is no bigger than 3.5% of the United States population. They've completely taken over every conversation. 2.5% of the Jews have taken over the influence of Judeo-Christianity. We got 40% of America's Christians that were hiding out and were nervous. We're the only people group that's constantly the butt of everybody else's joke. We never say anything. What's up with that? So what that tells me is that we actually don't have a way of engaging the system. Now, it's not exactly, totally the case. Because you guys here, you're a business group. This is the beauty of this. Now, you're a business group. What does that mean? That means that the church actually can be in the gates of influence. So I do the gates this way. This is actually the Chinese word for gates. I'm telling everybody, you might as well get used to what China looks like. Here it is. So Jesus said, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So I call these the gates of influence, because you see at the top of each one of these spheres, from the Supreme Court to the Academy Awards to the New York Times and CNN, at the top, the higher up you go, the more leverage and influence each of those verticals have. And the point of the matter is that where does hell locate itself? Rather than some kind of abstraction out there, the hell locates itself right over these areas here. So for you, my encouragement is, think in terms of expanding your business and funding enterprises that are going to be contending at the gates of hell. Because the church should be up there. Jesus said, I'll build my church. Now, the word for church there is ecclesia. Same word that's used for this. This ecclesia refers to the called out gathering of the group. But this area here refers to the called out micro group. This is Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego at the top of the government mountain. In other words, 3 or 4 of you are gathered together in my name. There I am. You only need 3 or 4. Look at the tables you got. You only need 3 or 4 in your sector of business, and you can become a leveraging influence over that vertical. We just don't think that way. Final thought is this. What we're talking about is, for anyone here who's, how many of you are 50 years old or older? Just out of curiosity. Perfect. You're in a perfect place. This, from 50 years old to older, it's called convergence. Convergence is a sweet spot. Only 20% of Christians ever get there, but it refers to the place where your gifts, talents, and acquired skills are wrapped together in an assignment that God created for you before you were born. So there is such a thing as being set apart to do a destiny. And convergence is when you're in the sweet spot where you're doing the thing that God created you to do before you were born. And when you're there, you're living in a rhythm of supernatural and divine activity. It's almost as though angels are operating. Divine appointments are all over the place. Convergence can last for a long period of time. 50 years old is the average age when convergence starts to materialize in the Western Hemisphere. And it can go on, as you've seen with the age of the average presidential candidate, from Biden to Bernie Sanders. They can go on well into your 80s if you wanted to. So let's just say that convergence can last up until you're like 75 or 80 by reason of health. And then after that, you have a stage called legacy. It's interesting you have a legacy conference, because legacy is the stage after convergence. This is based on data from 30 years of analysis from Dr. Bobby Clinton at Fuller Theological Seminary, based on actual data. The first stage of convergence is sovereign beginnings. That's your age, when you were born, the nation you were put in, the birth order, the origin of your family. Curiously enough, the profession of your father has something to do with what you're doing right now. Then you have gift discovery and development. You found out you could talk, you could think, you could lead, you're good with numbers, you're not good with numbers, you're dyslexic, but you can communicate, whatever. Then you have spiritual formation happens somewhere in this stage. That's when you meet Jesus, you come to know the Lord, and God starts to separate you under his own purposes. Then you have a thing called life maturing. Life maturing is when your parents are ailing, you get a job, your wife gets pregnant, or you have to move, or you're involved with military service, or you're settled with debt, you're in a job you don't like, you got a couple of kids. But life maturing happens to everybody. And what's crazy is between life maturing and the next stage, convergence comes out of life maturing. It's almost as though God is maturing you. And you step into the convergence zone. That zone is when a role comes to you by divine appointment to do something you've been prepared for your whole life to do. In terms of mountains, it's kind of fun because mountains, people say, well, I don't know, I'm kind of called to more than one. Yeah, Ronald Reagan's fascinating. Ronald Reagan starts with doing it in like the entertainment mount. Actually, it was a sports mount. Then he was a sportscaster, and then he was in the movie business, but actually he was the Screen Actors Guild leader for the union. So he was actually getting himself involved with government work. Then he was a spokesman for Westinghouse, and from there he went into the actual government work in California, and from there he went to the President of the United States. So he starts off with baseball, and ends up going to Hollywood, into union work, into California as a governor, to the president. So part of the mountains thing is you can actually be in more than one mountain in your career, and convergence might call you from one zone into another. But no matter which one you go to, you should go for the top. Because there's disproportionate salt and light influence at the top where the gates of hell are located. So you don't want to pull away from the coarseness of culture. You want to get 2 or 3 other believers with you and push the battle at the gates. Well, I've run out of time. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Lance Wallnau. I want to thank you for watching this broadcast. And if you'd like to see more of what we've got coming up, and you never know when something new is going to be interesting, just hit the subscribe button right there, and I look forward to seeing you in a future broadcast.